With us now on LigNet is the former U.S. Ambassador to Mexico, Antonio Garza. He served from 2002 to 2009. And Mr. Ambassador, thanks so much for being with us today.
You bet, Kathleen. My pleasure.
Well, most of the U.S. headlines about Mexico now focus on drug violence and executions, yet you recently called Mexico perhaps the brightest light in the region. What did you mean by that, and how does that compare to the stories about drug violence?
Well, I think you're starting to get a better sense of the economic possibilities in Mexico, both in terms of growth, GDP, further integration with the U.S. market, year-on-year increase in bilateral trade, up double digits. I think the number was 15-16% over last year. So while there is a continuing security concern, there's also an economic story to be told. I think increasingly investors, global and certainly U.S., are looking at Mexico as an attractive platform for manufacturing and export both to U.S. and global markets. And with that, clearly, they're factoring in, if you will, the concerns that that one has, given the ongoing violence and cartel issues.
Now, certainly the proximity between the U.S. and Mexico makes the two countries important to each other. What are the most important bilateral issues right now?
Well, I think certainly the security one seems to be the one, obviously, that dominates the conversation. So I would have to say security, further integration in terms of trade. The border issues are both those of ongoing violence on the southern side of the border, although in the northern cities, El Paso continues to be one of the safest cities in the country. And the northern border cities have done well. But you have security, further integration in terms of trade, and I think next generation initiatives with respect to further integrating our markets. It seems as though there has been a little less discussion about immigration. I think that's largely because the net immigration, undocumented immigration to the United States is practically zero right now. So I'd say security and trade are the big issues.
Now, Mexico will inaugurate a new president, Enrique Peña Nieto, in December, bringing the PRI back into power. How do you see that impacting U.S.-Mexico relations going forward?
Well, I think in terms of the big issues, they will remain. I guess sort of to macro frame them, I would say security and prosperity. Enrique Peña Nieto, throughout his campaign, he focused on domestic initiatives necessary to Mexico's competitiveness. He talked of the urgent need for reform with respect to fiscal and labor, and quite frankly, he jumped right into the discussion about energy reform, which was a bit surprising to many observers. But I think one recognizes that if Mexico is really going to step up in terms of their economic growth and place in the region and the world, they're going to have to undertake the more difficult reform, and I think that is energy. Here in the short term, what you're seeing is discussion about the need for more transparency in government. So I am impressed with the initiatives that are being discussed. Obviously, the proof is in whether or not the new administration can work both with the outgoing, the PAN, because they don't have a clear majority in Congress, but whether they can work with the outgoing administration and build a coalition to accomplish some of these things that have been discussed throughout the campaign.
Now, what should U.S. policymakers be paying more attention to in Mexico that we may be ignoring?
I think really what we have to be focusing on is in transitions, Kathleen, you always have there's a change in personalities. Many times there's a change in tone. With the return, if you will, of the PRI after 12 years out of government, there have been some concerns expressed in the United States about whether or not this is the, quote, old PRI. And I think what we have to keep our eye on are our objectives, and that is a broader, deeper relationship as it relates to security, building on the already robust intelligence capabilities that we have with Mexico, building on the economic integration, building on Mexico as a interlocutor on regional issues. And so I'd say it's not that there will be new issues, it's that we don't lose sight of what our objectives are in Mexico, or that we don't get too distracted by the very fact that when governments go through transitions, there are new personalities, and that shouldn't, and that's sort of a natural part of a process, that we should be patient with a transition, and then get right back to building on some, I think, some very healthy platforms as they relate to security and trade.
Now, what about in terms of the U.S. presidential election? Is Mexico concerned about either candidate?
Well, interestingly, I think that this phenomena happens once every 12 years, where we both have our presidential elections. And since they have just come off theirs and they are very focused on a transition, discussion of our U.S. presidential race is not necessarily top of mind. Certainly amongst the leadership and people that do business, they are watching our U.S. elections closely. But it is not it's not a top of mind issue or something that's discussed, if you will, on Main Street.
Now, what do you think?
Which I think is a bit different from other years.
Now, what do you think what is your outlook for U.S.-Mexico relations, both short and long term?
Well, I think short term we've identified the issues, and long term the relationship is so broad, and so there's such a convergence in many respects between the U.S. and Mexican marketplaces, and given our geography, there has been a level of, for lack of a better word, institutionalization of our relationships, and so my outlook is very bullish because of where Mexico is positioned economically, and I think the heightened appreciation in the United States for what Mexico can represent regionally and start playing a larger role as a partner. So I'm actually quite optimistic about the relationship.
All right, Ambassador Antonio Garza, thanks so much for being with us.
Okay, thank you.
And thank you for watching LIGNET.